Welcome back to the studio. Today, we're going to talk about beaver tail leather. That's right, it's pretty unique. So we're going to talk about what it is, a little bit about how it's made, and then we're going to share more about pros and cons in crafting and what to consider if you're going to use it on your next project. So with that, let's dive right in. Beaver tail leather is a stiff leather with a scaly surface texture that comes from the beaver. Pieces are generally under 1 square foot, and it's usually suited for small leather goods because you're working with a generally smaller surface area of the original material. It offers really good scratch resistance, it's nearly waterproof, and makes for a really unique option for different leather projects and small accessories. And unlike some other leathers, beaver tail leather is usually chrome tanned or vegetable tanned. It can be done either way, and that's going to give it some different properties for use in the end. So let's check out a little bit about the history, and then we'll dive into the material itself. For a long time, beavers have been very popular for their fur. Especially around the 1500s, the fur trade really picked up, and beavers were being utilized very frequently until around the 1900s. So for around 400 years, although that almost led to the extinction of beavers, which would be obviously a terrible thing. So conservation efforts picked up, and the population started to flourish, and things were back to a really good spot. And so with that, there are still some availability to utilize the beaver tails to make some pretty innovative and useful leather materials. All right, let's take a closer look at the actual grain pattern in the surface of beaver tail leather. Whoa, when we look, it's almost like a small dragon scale or something. And you could see literally, each scale, kind of the texture of it in there, and they're all relatively unique. So you get this pretty cool non-uniform pattern to it that can definitely lend itself to some innovative projects. When we look at the bottom, it's a relatively smooth grain pattern. We do see some lines in there that are natural to the material itself. But overall, it's relatively, simple and thin as well. And so it'll have a smooth kind of feel and texture to it. And looking at the cross section, we could see very prominently now how deep those scales run, into the leather material itself. And so the thickness overall is going to have some variation given to that pattern of scale texture. So just keep that in mind when you're crafting about how that may translate into the flexibility, comfort, and/or strength of a certain piece that you're cutting out. For production, a typical vegetable tan process can be used where we're using the different tanning agents and tannins over a long period of time to create a little more dense and a little stronger piece of leather. It could also be chrome tanned, using that faster process that will produce a little bit of a softer and more flexible leather. So depending on what type you may want in your end product, you could look for either a chrome tanned or a veg tanned version. Additionally, the beaver tail leather can be left natural in its color, or it can be dyed to any number of colors. So again, you've got options there too. For production volume, we're looking at anywhere between around 25 to 100,000 estimated tails processed per year. And the key countries where it's produced are Canada and the United States. The biggest exporting country is the US, and the biggest importing country are a few in Europe. For cost, they're generally run around between $10 and $60 per piece, and there's going to be a lot of variation in there based on the tanning process, the quality of the actual finished piece, and the size as well. Usually, the larger and more quality the tanning process is, the more expensive it is. Although, like most things, you can find a lot of variations, and some good options within that range. For pros, it's got, first and foremost, a really unique look, and it can be used for a lot of projects that you would usually be looking for, a synthetic leather that has different properties to it. So if you're looking to make something with like a dragon scale pattern, or some kind of a, texture like that, this has that naturally. And it makes it pretty unique within the leather world and even the exotic leather world. Another pro is the option of veg tanned or chrome tanned. Depending on the look and feel that you want in that finished piece, it's great to have either one available. And from a function standpoint, it's relatively durable and scratch resistant and water resistant, naturally. You could certainly apply additional layers of protectant on top or anything that you'd like to customize that further. But it's definitely an asset that, as is, it already has some really good material properties in it. For the cons, it can be difficult working with this type of leather, given that it does have those scales on top. Cutting may not yield, a perfectly smooth and even surface. For example, if you're cutting through a scale, it may look like on a finished product, you have a half a scale on the edge of a piece. And so is that, can you work around that? Of course, there's a lot of ways to do it. It just means a little extra planning, in your crafting for that. And another con is size. Given that they are relatively small, you may have to consider how or what types of items you're going to use it for, just given that you're working with an initially more limited, material size to start with. And a potential con is cost. Depending on what type you're getting, the tanning method, how big it is, it may get a little more costly than other natural leathers. And so just something to keep in mind that cost can be a con in some cases here. A few great uses for it are wallets. If you're making something like watch straps, small knife sheaths, you could do keychains and any kind of even inlays in other leather materials or wood. Just given its texture, it's really a great possibility to use for smaller leather items and even as accents to other crafted pieces that you're working with. Tips for working with it include when you're cutting, you can try cutting from the backside, and that way the knife will have less of an opportunity to kind of jump through these ridges as you're cutting along, and that will give you a straighter edge overall. And if you're looking for a very even surface, you can do some sanding or skiving on the top. Yes, that will obviously remove some of these scales, but if you've got a piece where you want a precisely even work surface, that is an option. Just test it out because it will change the visual appearance. So you want to make sure that that matches what you're trying to do. Or if you're going to apply some kind of a colorant or a dye or a coating on top, that may not matter as much. So just keep that in mind as you're going. When needed, certainly apply some conditioners to it to make it more flexible. That may give you better results in your finished product. If you are curious about beaver tail leather, where it came from and how it could be used for crafting, there you have it. If you have questions, let us know. And if you've worked with this, please share as well. We're always interested to learn more about your experiences and how we could all learn from one another. So until next time, keep crafting.